Good morning and welcome back to Science Farm Live. I hope you've had a great British Science Week this week so far. Maybe you've already joined us to see lambs and calves being born. You might have seen some of the mini beasts on Tuesday. Maybe we even caught up with our chicks hatching yesterday. All such amazing experiences with this theme of growth we've got going on this week. Today's lesson is something that you have been asking us about right from the start, back to British Science Week 2021 when we started doing these lessons, and that's the theme of climate change. It's great to be with you today to actually talk about that in a bit more detail and to be able to explain what British farmers are doing to help fight climate change and be climate change superheroes. So, I'm really lucky today. I'm going to be joined later by farmer Jess. She's also a scientist. So get your questions in. We've already had loads come in, but we'd love to see more, especially as the lesson comes along, and there might be something that you might be interested in what we're saying. Equally, remember that you can upvote questions. So one of the things you can do, if you see a question on there that's similar to the question that you want to ask, it's actually much better to click the upvote, the thumbs up button, to promote that question, to upvote it. That way it's more likely that your question is going to get answered. Okay, so let's get started. What are we talking about today? Climate change. Well, what actually is that? What's causing climate change and what's happening? Well, it's all to do with something called the greenhouse effect. So we at the moment are living here on planet Earth. It's nice day today. It's sunny outside here for us. And that sun provides lots of warmth to our planet, otherwise we'd be very cold. And the way that happens is it comes through something called the atmosphere, which is above us. It covers the entire of the planet. The sun's rays come through that and they heat us up. They keep us to the right temperature for all the plants and animals that live in the world. Some of that gas and some of that warmth then escapes again back out through the atmosphere. However, what's happening at the moment is something called the greenhouse effect. And that atmosphere is actually getting thicker due to more gases being emitted. And that's one of the words that I want you to think about and learn today, something called emissions, carbon emissions. Okay, there are other gases as well, so you might hear them called greenhouse gas emissions, you might hear them called carbon emissions. That's purely because carbon is the most ubiquitous, the most common of those greenhouse gases. Carbon is everywhere around us, and that's because we all breathe it out, as do pretty much all living things. And that's a process called respiration that you might have already learned about in science. The second word, and this is a tricky word, so I want you to think and maybe repeat this word, is called sequestration. Okay, and what that means is, or sequestering is the process of that, and that means that something is absorbing carbon, it's storing carbon, and things that are really good at doing that are things like trees, soils. We actually store a lot in the world's oceans as well, but sequestering is taking that carbon and pulling it back into the ground or into a living thing and keeping it locked away and not adding to that layer of the atmosphere in the air that's stopping that heat escaping. So for millions of years, those two things have been in balance. So we've emitted carbon, that's the word emissions, but also we've been sequestering carbon. Well, I say we, it's mainly been actually other living things such as trees, plants, grasslands, soils, all taking it in and storing it away, locking it away, and making sure that we've got a balance. Now, in the last 100 years or so, we've started to see that amount of emissions, the number of gases coming out, has massively increased. The reason for that is because actually there's more people on the planet and they're also doing lots of things that emit greenhouse gases. So they could be driving cars, powering buildings, powering new gadgets or creating new gadgets, and all of those things will add to the amount of carbon going up into the atmosphere. So the first question I have for you, because we've got 3 polls for you today, is I'd like you to think in your classroom, what do you think emits the most greenhouse gases, the most carbon in the United Kingdom? So you can see on the screen there's a number of options. I'm going to give you a minute or so just amongst your class. Which do you think emits the most? Okay, so let's have a look at our results. It's going to show up in the polling, and also I'd love to show you this bar graph now that shows you which is used the most. Did you get it right? The answer is transport. Of course, that's really important. We need to get places, but also it's a big contributor. You can see also that agriculture emits 10% of UK emissions. Now, the thing that we think as farmers is that is still 10% too much. And actually we're working as farmers to try and be something called net zero. So what is net zero? What does that mean? Well, it goes back to those two words that I already explained, emission and sequestration. Emission is the amount of gases that you're giving out, the amount of greenhouse gases that are going up into the atmosphere, and sequestration are those how many we can actually store, we can lock away in soil and plants. And net zero is all about balancing those two things. So you want to be able to absorb as much as you emit. So the way you can do that is you can emit less. So we want to give out less greenhouse gases, and also we want to store more of those gases away through that thing called sequestration. And if you can get them in balance, it's called net zero. And we're committed to do that by the year 2040. So how are farmers doing that? Well, we're really lucky today. We're joined by a farmer and scientist called Jess, and she's doing things both to reduce her emissions and to increase her sequestration, how much carbon she's locking away in her soil. So in a second, we're going to go and have a little video. We went to visit her farm about a month ago, but I'd just like to remind you before that you can ask questions again. So make sure while you're watching the video, have a think. Have you got any questions? You can put them up on using the question app. Keep sending them in to us. We'd love to answer them because she is going to be joining us in the studio very, very shortly. So while you're doing that, getting your questions, we're also going to whiz over now and see how I got on at Jess's farm. I'm here on Jess's farm, which is a dairy farm. When you look around me here, you can see two things mainly. Firstly, dairy cows. Secondly, tons of grass. Okay, and that's perfect because they're a type of animal called a ruminant. They've got a big stomach with 4 compartments, not 4 separate stomachs. Some people sometimes get confused with that. And what they do is they eat that grass and they turn it into milk that you can use for things like your breakfast cereal, turn it into cheese or yogurt, loads of amazing products. One of the downsides of ruminant animals, though, is that they emit something called methane. It's a gas that goes into the atmosphere, mainly through their burps. Now, what farmers are trying to do, and scientists, because we know that Jess is a farmer and a scientist, is find a way to make them do that less and be better for the environment. I'm going to head up to the cowshed now and meet Jess and find out what she's been doing as part of her university studies to stop those burps. Hi Jess, can you tell me a little bit about the work you're doing at university at the moment?
Yeah, so I study animal science at the University of Nottingham, and part of this is working on a project called Project Ecologico. And at this project, we're looking at feeding ruminants, which is a cow with 4 different stomachs.
Yeah, so 4 parts in the big tummy, yeah.
Yeah, seaweed to reduce their methane emissions, and that's how we're working to combat climate change from a research point of view.
Fantastic. So how do you feed a cow seaweed?
Yeah, so the seaweed goes into this special mix down here. So although the cows mainly have grass, they also have this to diversify their diet and to ensure that they get something other than the grass to keep them milking a little bit of milk. This has all their vitamins and minerals in it, and the seaweed will also be in this too.
It will go in there as well. So some vitamins, some seaweed, great little snack when they come up to milk. So how on earth does this work? I mean, I'm a little bit confused here. I bet you are at home as well. How does feeding seaweed to a cow make it burp less?
So the cows have bacteria in their rumen, and this rumen causes the fermentation of the grass and the food when they eat it. And as a side product, they produce methane. So the seaweed has a reagent in it called bromoform, and this reacts with the bacteria to make them stop producing the methane.
Okay, that's amazing. So one little part of that seaweed actually stops quite a lot of burps.
Yes.
Fantastic. Who'd have known that? So how then do you test that that's working? How do you know is it bromoform, is that the right word? See if we can remember that at the end of the lesson. How do you check that that's working, that that's actually reducing the emissions?
Yeah, so before we give the seaweed to the cows, the different seaweed species have to go to the lab to undergo an experiment called chromatography to see if they have this bromoform, and if they do, how much they have, and we can compare them, and the one with the most is the one we choose to feed to the cows because it will have the most effect.
So what are you comparing? Are you comparing different types of seaweed, different amounts of seaweed?
Yeah, so it's done on different types of seaweed, not different amounts, because you only need a small sample to determine the relative amount of bromoform levels to each other.
So you're doing a lot of testing basically to find the best type of seaweed, and then do you do anything else after that?
No, basically we just have to check that it's ethically correct, so we have an ethics review to do to ensure that our cows have high animal welfare, and then we just mix it into the diet and the cows eat it, and then they go off to the grass
Fantastic.
again.
So you're doing everything you can to make sure that the cows are safe before they have that.
Yes.
Now the question is, I really have, and I think a lot of people at home will have and at school, is how on earth did you decide that you wanted to be a seaweed cow scientist?
Yeah, so at school I really love sciences, so I studied science through all of my life at school, and I now decided to do an animal science degree, and then after it I want to go on to do a PhD, which is a huge research project, and I've actually got one that I'm going to be doing on the cows.
So what's next then for you in terms of your studies?
Yeah, so I'm going to do a doctorate in cow science, and this is going to be based on detecting illnesses in the cows even earlier than we can now to improve the animal health and welfare even more.
Amazing. We have learnt so much in just a short time in the cow shed. We're going to pop back to the studio, and then later on we're going to be out in the field again too. Wow, absolutely amazing to see how Jess is working as a scientist to try and reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. Fantastic work, and who knew that you could feed a cow seaweed? So we've talked about emissions. I'm going to remind you of that word sequestration one more time, talking about how you can lock carbon away in soil, in plants, in oceans to try and reach that balance of net zero. So she's already decreased those emissions, but also what we want to do is increase the sequestration. I wonder how Jess is doing that on farm. The good news is I asked her when I was there, so let's find out. So Jess, we've talked about how you're doing some science as a scientist to help these ladies burp less and emit less. But what are you doing day to day as a farmer to help climate change?
Yeah, so farmers in agriculture are working really hard to fight climate change and reduce our carbon emissions. So here, as you can see, these girls are out in the field eating the grass. And this grass is really important because the soil that it grows on is what we use to sequester carbon emissions and store it deep underground so it's not in the atmosphere.
Fantastic. So actually, people sometimes talk a lot about things like trees helping stop carbon to make emissions equal, but this grass is equally important, and you're telling me that actually it's storing carbon in the ground under here.
Yeah, so this grass is what we call permanent pasture, which means that it doesn't get ploughed at all, ever. So this grass has really long roots. And when the grass takes in the carbon dioxide to turn it into sugar by photosynthesis, this carbon that it takes in gets stored deep down at the bottom of the roots, and it just stays there because we don't dig the soil up by ploughing, so it's just stored there permanently.
Fantastic. So actually, yeah, this is an amazing example. You can't grow crops on this land at all. As you can see, it's quite steep going up and down here, no tractors going up and down, but it's serving an amazing purpose. Is there anything you do with your cows to make the grass better at storing carbon?
Yeah, so we try to be really efficient with the way that we use this grassland. So as you can see, we are stood in one of 21 different paddocks. So the reason that we split this field into 21 different fields is so that the cows get fresh grass every day and they're not wasting any of that grass. And what's even better is that these cows recycle the nutrients back onto the grass by pooing and weeing on it. And we just improve our efficiency so much by doing that as the cows move every single day. and the grass has loads of time to recover. It has 3 weeks until the cows are back in it again, and it also helps with the cows' routine. So that's our way of fighting climate change.
Fantastic. So not only is that meaning that they are improving the grass, improving the land around them, it means they get a fresh meal every single day as well. And as you can see, they're really happy, these cows, eating their grass, and in turn they're going to be making some lovely milk today that will hopefully end up on your breakfast table very soon. Right, back to the studio. Absolutely amazing. Who knew that just by moving the cows into different areas you could have such an impact on the environment? And soils are so important. We're really lucky because after this lesson, if you want to, we've teamed up with the Country Trust, who've got some really fantastic activities that you can do all about super soils to investigate soils in your local area. They're available on the Encounter EDU website on this lesson page. Just click the link and you can become a soil scientist. Fantastic. So we've talked about carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. We've talked about carbon sequestration and how we can try and increase that on farm. But actually, what do we do in our homes that's related to food that could be causing carbon emissions that we could help with? Well, I want to talk to you about a subject that I'm really passionate about, food waste. And I'm really passionate about that because I see every day how much effort farmers put into producing food. So the first question I've got for you about food is, how much food do you think that we waste worldwide? Right, so I'm going to let those results just keep coming in for a little bit, and I'm just going to tell you a few other facts about food waste that might blow your mind, because it certainly did mine. So if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, only behind the USA and China. In the United Kingdom, where we live, 5.5% of all of our emissions come from food waste, which is a huge amount. It's 25 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. Now that's quite hard to visualise, but that's actually the same amount of emissions as the country of Kenya, which has 25 million people living, not 25 million people, 53 million people, almost double that. Sorry, got my facts a bit mixed up there. If every UK household didn't waste food for a day, that would be the equivalent of planting 230 million trees. So you can see it's a huge, huge problem that we have. So in terms of the poll results, it was the top one. 25% of food worldwide is wasted. That's a huge number. Think about how much food that could be, a quarter of all the food in the world. I've got another question for you now that you might find interesting. Can you guess the most wasted food in the United Kingdom? So I'm going to let you keep putting your answers in, I'm not going to tell you the top one yet, but I'm going to tell you two of the answers that were wrong, okay? But there they make up the other top three. So don't know number one yet, but number two is milk. And that's really important to us today because we're with Jess, who's a dairy farmer. Now in the UK, 7% of all milk is wasted. So if you look at this 2 litre container of British milk, that's about 140 millilitres. That's the same as about one of these small cups that's being wasted from every one of these containers. At number 3 is bread. And actually this is one of the most wasted things by volume as well. 44% of all bread is wasted. Now I've got this lovely loaf of bread here from our local farm shop. It's got 15 slices in it. So that's the equivalent of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 loaves of bread wasted. Oh, let's not waste this bread at the same time. Of that loaf, that much in the UK goes in the bin every single day. But you might be asking what number 1 is. It's potatoes. And think about it, how often do you end up throwing away mouldy potatoes in your house instead of eating them? So the top 3, bread, milk and potatoes, all come from British farmers. Now this is not only a problem in terms of the food waste and the food being wasted, but actually a lot of things are wasted along the way. And my final question for you before we get Jess on for our question and answer session is I'd like you to think about in your classroom what else gets wasted along the way. So one example I'll give you is that Jess's milk is transported to a dairy by a tanker truck, which is fueled by diesel. Now if 7% of that milk gets thrown away, that's 7% of the fuel, the diesel, that's gone into the atmosphere as well through carbon emissions from the truck. Can you think of any other examples of things that might be wasted along the way in the production of milk? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that while we get Jess into the studio. Hi Jess, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited. We've got loads of questions coming through on the iPad here. We're going to go straight in with the most popular question loads of schools want to answer. There's about 30 people have upvoted it. They want to know, is climate change and global warming the same thing? And that originally came from Southborough Primary School in Bromley.
Wow, so I would answer this question as no, they are definitely not the same thing. So global warming actually causes climate change. So with global warming, the gases that are emitted, so the carbon, gets trapped in the atmosphere and that heats up the planet, which then causes climate change. So no, they're definitely not the same thing.
Fantastic, thanks so much, Jess. One for you about your cows, or just generally as a scientist, how do you measure the amount of methane that's being emitted by the cows? That came from RGS Prep School.
Yeah, so there are many different ways of doing it, but basically it's like a little eco-feed machine. So when the cow goes into the milking parlour to be milked, they have like a little corn in the parlour and they breathe onto this machine whilst they're eating the corn, and that machine measures the amount of methane they give off in that time. So that's how we know, and then we multiply it by the length of the day.
It's absolutely amazing. Every time we talk about this, it absolutely blows my mind. So let's stick on methane then as a subject, because this has come in for quite a few times. Water Autumn Primary would like to know, could you use the methane as a source of energy that comes from the cows?
So that's something that has definitely been spoken about. However, my personal issue with this is that to capture all of the methane from the cows, they would need to be kept indoors, so completely enclosed from the outdoors, so that the methane was all trapped. But my cows like to go outdoors and eat the grass, so I can't trap my cow's methane to use it for energy and heating and things like that. Thank you.
That's great. And then St Bartholomew's Primary were interested to know that, do all animals make methane?
So no, all animals don't. It's a special type of animal called a ruminant that makes methane. So that's your cows, your sheep and your goats. But because cows are the biggest, they tend to be the ones that take the hit for the methane, and they have the largest stomach, the rumen, with the 4 different chambers that have all the bacteria that creates this methane. So no, it's not all animals, it's just ruminants.
And Cranfield want to know, where do you get your seaweed from?
So actually in the sea it's actually harvested just like fruit and vegetables are harvested on the ground. People harvest seaweed from the sea, but it depends on the type of seaweed as to what country it comes from. So the one that's native to this country is a seaweed called Ascophyllum, but there's one in Australia that's called Asparagopsis taxiformis. So it all really depends on where you're based as to what seaweed you use.
Absolutely amazing. So even the seaweed you're using is local seaweed as well. Buy local when you're buying seaweed, everybody. I think that's fantastic, actually. A product that's still coming from near to us is being used. So we're going to get a question from Normanhurst School now. We've talked about cows quite a lot, but we've obviously touched on soil quite a bit as well. What can we do as farmers to improve the health of soil?
Yeah, so a key thing that farmers can do is constantly monitor their soil by testing it to try and understand what nutrients the soil needs. We can get a good analysis of that, and then we can treat it with different things like phosphorus and potassium if needed. But to protect it from the rain and the frost in the winter, some farmers, so arable farmers, tend to plant a cover crop. So arable farmers produce things like wheat and barley and vegetables. And this cover crop will grow long roots and keep the structure of the soil over the winter months before they replough it and plant new crops in the spring. And that just helps really maintain it and make sure that those nutrients stay there and they're not washed away by the rain or the rivers and things like that.
Fantastic. Another question we've had, and this is an interesting one. We've been asked, do farmers only grow fruits and vegetables and crops, or do they grow anything else?
So we really like this question, and no, we don't just grow fruits and vegetables. In fact, I don't grow any fruits and vegetables. The main thing that I grow is grass. But there is a lot of farmers out there that grow things like wheat and barley and sugar beet and all of the different things that go into like the flour and your bread and stuff like that. There's just so many crops out there, and we grow all of them.
Fantastic. So quickly back to the seaweed again. I know you've got lots of questions. We've got lots of questions about the seaweed. We've been asked, how do you actually get the cows to eat seaweed? Do you mix it in with do you spread it on the grass? Do you do something else? How do you actually get those cows to eat seaweed?
So it's actually been trialled in both ways. It has been spread on the grass in the past, but the way in which we're doing it is mixing it into the cow's feed. So as you saw in the video, they have like a little mix in front of the feed barrier, and that will get mixed into there so that they eat it along with the rest of their nutrients and their vitamins and their minerals for the day.
Fantastic. So the next question we've got so many coming in. I'm going to have a quick look now again at all the ones that have been upvoted by you guys. I know a lot of you have been asking about what you can do at home. We are going to come on to that, so don't worry. Someone said, in the UK, is extreme cold weather as bad for the environment as hot? That's from St Luke's CE Primary School in Kingston.
Yeah, so definitely in terms of it's bad for the animals are particularly affected by the cold. So young calves really don't like the transition from very cold weather to very hot weather. It can cause things like pneumonia. But the heat then causes the droughts. Too much rain then causes flooding. All weather affects farming in some way. It's just the extremes that make it really difficult for us to carry out what we need to do.
Fantastic. And I wonder if you could expand on that a bit more, because I know it's been asked as well. How does climate change affect farmers?
Yeah, so in terms of climate change, we've been getting a lot more rainfall and we've been having like very dry springs. So this has meant for me personally that my grass hasn't been growing as well as it should have been. And therefore, when we go to make the winter feed, so the silage and the hay for the cows, we've not been getting as much, or we've been struggling to get it because it's been too wet and we can't get on the field with our tractor because it gets stuck in the field. So climate change is having some very negative effects for us, but we're hoping that we can get over them by sequestering more carbon into our soils and helping reverse the effects of global warming and therefore tackling climate change.
Fantastic. And you're doing so much work on farm as well. It would be good just to do a bit of a recap. This has come up again as a question quite a few times. Just talking about what methane is. When we talk about methane, what is it?
So methane is a greenhouse gas that comes from a cow's fermentation in its rumen. So there are bacteria in the cow's stomach that react with the food, and it basically produces this gas called methane as a result of the enteric fermentation. The cow then burps this methane out and it rises into the atmosphere. But methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so it really does heat up the planet.
Fantastic, yeah, so you can see in it, but of course it's not just cows that emit methane, there's other things as well, so such as energy generation, also can be burped out by things within volcanoes, examples like that. So it's obviously a big problem as a gas, but the great thing is that we can do something about the methane from cows, much more so than we can do, say, from a volcano.
Definitely, yes.
And also switching to greener energy as well, which I know a lot of farmers are doing. They're working on sustainable energy for their farms too. Right, we're just going to start to bring the lesson to wrap up now. One of the most popular questions we've had from West Walton Primary School, and I think this is great, guys, is what can I do when I am only 9 years old? Well, we've got a challenge for you, me and Jess. We'd like you to come up with a climate-friendly food plan for your school, because we think everybody can have a go at this, and we'd like you to think how you can reduce food waste and also support farmers like Jess who care about the environment. We'd like you to research the difference between food products and also from different countries, because actually the way that Jess produces her milk in a climate-friendly way can often not be found in different countries. We'd love you to go and talk to the people who are making the food at your school, the school kitchen. Can they tell you where your food is from and how it was produced? And also, when you go to the supermarket, are there any labels that you can look for that tell you where the food's come from? Maybe something like the little red tractor, where you can see that that food has come from British farms. So we'd love that for you. We'll put that on our Twitter page and our Facebook page as well. So if you'd like to do that and go back to that, we'll make sure we share it. And we'd love to hear about what you're doing in your school. As you can see, food waste is such a big thing. For us, we've got that real passion to reach net zero by 2040 and not see any food products wasted, along with, of course, reducing our emissions and increasing our sequestration. I really hope you can remember those two words, and about trying to reach that net zero, that middle point. Less emissions, more sequestration. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jess, for joining us as well.
Thank you.
And sadly for us as well, we're actually signing off for Science Week now as well. So this has been the last of our 3 lessons. We've been joined by over 150,000 of you this week, which is absolutely mind-blowing for us. We really hope you've enjoyed the lesson, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. Bye-bye.